This is video 8, and we'll deal with the subject of transitioning. We'll be fairly concise in the video for two reasons. The first is that you've already done some transitioning when you did the critical incident stress debriefing course. And the second one is that the reading, which has been emailed out to you and is on our website, is pretty good at explaining how to do this. And I guess there's a third reason, which is that it's very similar. We've just talked about it in the concreteness one. So transitioning just really means moving between the 4 stages within the counseling process. We'll go back through those really quickly in a moment. And remember that you could be transitioning in either direction. There's really no progression in counseling as much as there's just moving back and forth. Sometimes people feel like they're ready to move on to action planning and then find out that they're not and have to go back and explore further. Or sometimes people from their evaluations want to go right into doing some new action planning instead of exploring the problem. So there's lots of different things we can do. How can we tell it's time to do a transition? Lots of different clues, but one of them is the pauses that people use. If they have a lengthier pause, if they don't look like they're ready to come up with the next idea to communicate, then that can be a hint to you that they've sort of finished telling their story. And letting some silence occur is something that is really a hard skill for a lot of us, but it's a good skill. And one of the reasons is I can tell a lot about where we are if there isn't something going into that space. So developing a sense of wait time and silence is a really important thing. And if you're not sure what to do during that silence, work on your body language and facial expressions so that you can let people know that you're still with them and that you're just waiting. If you hear people repeating ideas over and over and over again, and sometimes when people do this, it isn't necessarily a sign that they're ready to plan. Sometimes it's just ventilating. But if you ask people or check with people if they're ready to move on, either A, they'll say yes and not be ready to move on, and you'll be able to tell that because they'll keep going back, in which case you can go backwards, or they'll tell you that they are. So if people are repeating ideas just because they're kind of getting their stuff out, because they're unpacking it or ventilating, then that we'll work out, we'll find that out even if we do try a transition. Sometimes people will just simply tell you, no, I'm just kind of getting it out of my system. Sometimes the person will tell you, I don't have anything more to say, or there's nothing more I can tell you about it, or they'll use language like, well, no, that's about it, or I don't know what else I could say about it. And fourthly, the person begins moving into the stage themselves. So that's a really common one. I think it's probably one of the most common ones when you hear people throwing out ideas for themselves. Now be careful because people will often walk in the door and they'll start off by saying, I don't know what to do. I've tried everything. And they may even say that they've tried 1 or 2 things. That's a little different. I would still want to explore the problem very clearly at that point. But if I've been talking with people for a period of time and they start running through different options in their head, it might be a hint that it's time to transition. As we talked about, always use that 3-step process. I heard or I saw, here's what I think it means, and that might mean I think it's time to transition. And then, how do you feel about that? Or does that sound acceptable to you? And that's checking in. Again, this is review, the next part. The counseling process has these 4 stages. The first is the exploration stage, and really the counselor is a big facilitator here because they're asking artful questions that continuously explore and dig deeper, focusing on meaning, focusing on feelings. That can be quite time consuming, and it might happen over multiple conversations. The next thing is planning or action planning. Here, the counselor and the client are going to work together to start exploring options and deciding on a course of action. A couple of points. First, I think that the counselor needs to really have a delicate touch here and making sure that they are getting the client to think. Again, wait time really matters because sometimes we think we've given people time to digest or to come up with the answers, but really we often respond way too quickly and give people answers. Resist that temptation to be the fixer. Also, people will often come up with ideas that you almost immediately can tell are likely not to work. And I'm going to ask you to do something kind of uncomfortable here, which is to let people sort that out for themselves. And that might happen because you ask them really good artful questions such as, well, what do you think would happen if we did this? Or can you see some good things and some bad things about that? What's going to work? What's not going to work? Or, okay, that's one idea. Let's come up with a few and then compare them. The other thing you might simply end up having to do is let the person go out and try it and then come back and do some evaluation. And that can be really, really common later on. So don't go and give people answers. And don't assume that the answer that they come up with is going to not work, or tell them it's not going to work. Don't assume that their ideas won't work because they wouldn't work for you. Thirdly is the action stage. And we talked about this in a previous video, that in a more typical situation, the individual would go out and do this on their own or with instructions from their counselor. But here in our sector, we're often going to be with people and kind of navigate with them. Again, we might be asking them questions or giving cues and prompts. Okay, what was the next thing we were going to do? Or what words did we have? Or let's practice. Let's actually rehearse the actions. And then we called it evaluation. It also can be called review. And now we're sitting and we're artfully asking the person after they've tried it, hey, how did that work for you? How did that feel? What did you think that you would do again? What parts of this did you do that you think you might change the next time you try it? What homework or research do we need to do? And sometimes people need time to digest, so we might not do this minutes after they've tried something. And sometimes people kind of go back and revisit something they've already revisited once, and they get more out of it. And you keep on doing that. You keep on going through this whole process until discharge or termination, the process at which we say, all right, we've kind of graduated, and it's time for us to end our relationship. So again, like the last video, these slides are in your package, but they're further along, and there are a couple of examples. Mike, you're really frustrated by the challenges you're facing with Anne's teachers. Now I get to something that's somewhat concrete. I can hear that you're searching for solutions. Maybe the person said that, or they're starting to give them. So would you like to explore some options? This is a very, very simple transition. You notice I didn't get really meta and tell the person that it was time to start thinking about solutions. And for many of you, that meta approach, that really I think we should do this, that's more comfortable. And others of you are more concise and might find this approach more comfortable. Here's another one. Okay, Roger, I think we have some ideas for the future. It seems like you're most enthusiastic about taking a course. How about we start looking into the details and come up with a firm plan? So now this is a transition from action planning and kind of boiling down options into one, and committing to action, which is our third step. So you can see transition can even be important, for example, as a person is leaving a conversation and going out to try something. Okay, so that's transition. Reading will give you more information, and if you have questions, we'll talk about them in a Zoom conversation.